Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
The cars came fast towards Dublin, moving smoothly like small balls on the Noss Road. Sometimes the groups of people cheered. They were happy but supported the blue cars, the cars of their friends, the French. The French were almost the winners. In one of these nice blue cars were 4 young men who were very happy. They were Charles Seguin, the owner of the car, André Rivière, a young electrician from Canada, a large Hungarian man named Valona, and a neat young man named Doyle. Seguin was happy because he had gotten some orders earlier than expected. He was about to start a car business in Paris. And Rivière was happy because he was going to be the manager of the business. These 2 young men, who were cousins, were also happy because the French cars had done well. Valona was happy because he had eaten a very good lunch, and he was an optimistic person by nature. But the 4th member of the group was excited, but not truly happy. He was about 26 years old, with a soft, light brown mustache and innocent-looking gray eyes. His father had started his life as a strong nationalist but had changed his mind early on. He had made money as a butcher in Kingstown, and by opening more shops in Dublin and the suburbs, he had made a lot more money. He also got some contracts with the police and, in the end, became so rich that the Dublin newspapers called him a merchant prince. He had sent his son to England to study at a big Catholic college and then sent him to Dublin University to study law. Jimmy did not study very hard and got into some bad habits for a while. He had money and was popular, so he spent his time with musicians and car lovers. Then he was sent to Cambridge for a short time to see more of life. His father, though worried, was secretly proud of his son's wild behavior and paid all his bills and brought him home. At Cambridge, Jimmy had met Seguin. They were not close friends yet, but Jimmy enjoyed being with someone who had seen so much of the world and owned some of the biggest hotels in France. Such a person, as his father said, was worth knowing, even if he wasn't always the nicest. Valona was fun to be with too. He was a great piano player, but sadly very poor. The car drove happily with its group of laughing young men. The 2 cousins sat in the front seat, while Jimmy and his Hungarian friend, Valona, sat in the back. Valona was in a great mood. He hummed a deep, low tune for miles. The Frenchmen laughed and talked in light words, throwing them over their shoulders, and Jimmy often had to lean forward to hear what they were saying. This was not always fun for him because he usually had to guess what they meant and shout back a good answer while the wind was blowing. Valona's humming also made it hard to think, and the noise of the car didn't help. Moving quickly through the space made Jimmy excited. Being famous and having money also made him excited. He had been seen by many of his friends that day with these men from other countries. At one stop, Seguin had introduced him to one of the French racers. Jimmy had nervously tried to say something nice, and the racer had smiled, showing his shiny white teeth. It was nice to return to the real world of the crowd after this honor, with people nudging and giving him meaningful looks. Then there was the matter of money. Jimmy had control over a lot of it. Maybe Seguin didn't think it was a big amount, But Jimmy, who had strong instincts, knew how hard it had been to save up that much money. This knowledge had made him careful with his spending, even when he had made mistakes. Now that he was about to risk most of his money, it was even more serious for him. Of course, the investment was a good one, and Seguin had made it seem like he was doing Jimmy a favor by letting him invest his little bit of Irish money into the car business. Jimmy respected his father's smartness in business, and it had been his father who first suggested the investment. There was a lot of money to be made in the car business, a lot of money. Besides, Seguin looked like a rich man. Jimmy thought about how many days of hard work it would take to earn a car like the one he was sitting in. It ran so smoothly. They had driven so stylishly along the country roads. The ride felt like magic, making the excitement of life stronger, and the nerves in his body seemed to race like the fast blue car. They drove down Dame Street, which was busy with lots of traffic. There were loud car horns and the bells of tram drivers who were impatient. Near the bank, Seguin stopped the car, and Jimmy and his friend got out. A small group of people gathered on the sidewalk to admire the noisy car. The group was going to have dinner together that evening at Seguin's hotel, but first Jimmy and his friend, who was staying with him, were going home to change clothes. The car drove slowly away toward Grafton Street while the two young men walked through the crowd of onlookers. They walked north with a strange feeling of disappointment as the city's pale lights glowed above them in the soft haze of the summer evening. At Jimmy's house, this dinner was considered a special event. His parents were both proud and nervous. They were excited to be part of something important because the names of famous foreign cities always seemed to bring a certain value. Jimmy, too, looked very good in his clothes. As he stood in the hallway, fixing his bow tie for the last time, his father probably felt proud, knowing that Jimmy had qualities that money couldn't always buy. His father was being extra friendly to Valona, showing real respect for his foreign talents. But this kindness was likely lost on the Hungarian, who was getting very hungry for dinner. The dinner was perfect, really amazing. Jimmy thought Seguin had a very fancy taste. The group grew when a young Englishman named Routh, whom Jimmy had seen with Seguin at Cambridge, joined them. They ate in a cozy room lit by electric lamps that looked like candles. They talked a lot and were not shy at all. Jimmy, feeling excited, admired the way the young Frenchman seemed full of energy, mixed with the Englishman's more polite manner. It was a nice image in his mind, and he thought it was a fair one. He admired how well Seguin guided the conversation. The 5 young men had different interests, but now they were all talking freely. Valona, with great respect, began telling the Englishman about the beauty of English madrigals, old songs, and was sad that old musical instruments were no longer used. Riviere, not very sincerely, started explaining to Jimmy the success of French inventors. The loud voice of the Hungarian was about to mock the fake musical instruments shown in romantic paintings when Seguin cleverly changed the topic to politics. This was a topic everyone liked. Jimmy, under the influence of good food and wine, felt the old passion of his father waking up in him, and he even managed to get the sleepy Routh to join the conversation. The room became very hot, and Seguin had to work harder to keep control of the conversation. There was even a chance that someone might get offended. At the right moment, the sharp host raised his glass in a toast to humanity, and after they all drank, he opened a window to cool the room. That night, the city looked like a real capital. The 5 young men walked along Stephen's Green in a light cloud of sweet-smelling smoke. They talked loudly and happily, with their coats hanging from their shoulders. People stepped aside to let them pass. At the corner of Grafton Street, a short fat man was helping 2 beautiful ladies into a car, with the help of another fat man. The car drove off and the short fat man saw the group of young men. "Andre, it's Farley." A flood of conversation followed. Farley was an American. Nobody really knew what the conversation was about. Valona and Riviere were the loudest, but all the men were excited. They climbed into a car together, squeezing in while laughing a lot. They drove past the crowd, which was now just a mix of soft colors, with the sound of happy bells in the background. They took the train at Westland Row, and it seemed like only a few seconds later they were walking out of Kingstown Station. The ticket collector, an old man, greeted Jimmy. "Nice night, sir." It was a calm summer night. The harbor was like a dark mirror at their feet. They walked towards it, linking arms and singing Cadet Roussel together. They stomped their feet every time they sang. Ho! Ho! Ho-hee! Really? They got into a small rowboat at the dock and rowed out to the American's yacht. They were going to have supper, listen to music, and play cards. Valona said with confidence, "This is wonderful." There was a piano on the yacht inside the cabin. Valona played a waltz for Farley and Riviere, with Farley acting as the gentleman and Riviere as the lady. Then they made up a quick square dance, coming up with new dance moves. What fun they had! Jimmy joined in with excitement. This was truly living life. Then Farley got out of breath and shouted, "Stop!" A man brought in a light supper, and the young men sat down to eat, though just for show. They mostly drank instead. It felt like a bohemian style of life. They drank to Ireland, England, France, Hungary, and the United States of America. Jimmy gave a long speech, and every time he paused, Valona would say, "Here, here." There was loud clapping when Jimmy finished his speech. It must have been a good one because Farley clapped him on the back and laughed loudly. What friendly guys! What great company! Then it was time for cards. The table was cleared, and Valona quietly went back to the piano and played some music while the others played card games. They played many games, diving boldly into the adventure. They toasted to the Queen of Hearts and the Queen of Diamonds. Jimmy felt there was something missing, like they needed an audience, but the jokes and cleverness kept coming. The games were serious, and soon money started to be bet. Jimmy didn't know exactly who was winning, but he knew he was losing. But it was his fault because he kept making mistakes with his cards, and the others had to count his IOUs for him. They were wild guys, but he wished they would stop because it was getting late. Someone raised a toast to the yacht, the Belle of Newport, and then they decided to play one last big game to end the night. The piano had stopped playing. Valona must have gone up on deck. The final game was intense. They paused just before the end to drink for luck. Jimmy understood that the game was between Routh and Seguin now. Everyone was excited, including Jimmy, though he knew he would lose. How much had he written down? The men stood up to play the last cards, talking and waving their hands. Routh won. The cabin shook with the young men's cheers, and the cards were quickly gathered up. They started to collect their winnings. Farley and Jimmy were the ones who lost the most. Jimmy knew he would feel bad in the morning, but for now he was just happy to rest, happy for the dark, sleepy feeling that would cover up his mistakes. He leaned his elbows on the table and rested his head in his hands, feeling the beats of his pulse in his temples. The cabin door opened, and he saw Valona standing in a beam of gray light. "Daybreak, gentlemen,"